You Belong to Me, and she's also a RITA finalist for her book Silent Scream. So Karen, thanks for talking to us today and talking about page readers. Could you tell us a little bit about You Belong to Me, your latest release?
You Belong to Me is the story of Lucy Trask, who's a medical examiner, and J.D. Fitzpatrick, who's a homicide detective. And Lucy starts the story by finding a body at the end of her morning jog in the park behind her apartment. And she's just devastated initially to believe that is the body of her old friend and music teacher for whom she caretakes. He has Alzheimer's, and she thinks he's wandered out alone and has been beaten and murdered, and she can't even recognize his face, so she's devastated. JD arrives at the murder scene, and then Lucy realizes that it's not her old friend at all, and snaps back into ME mode, and realizes that this murder victim has multiple injuries, which are, of course, detailed. And but was dressed up to look like her old friend and left in the place where her old friend would always sit. So she is meant to find this body. So they don't know who he is. They don't know why she's meant to find the body, but they know that she was meant to find the body. And as she and JD begin to investigate this case, Lucy finds that she has to give up a lot of secrets that she's held very close for years. And she does know the victim. She doesn't know the victim the way that the killer thinks she does. And so the killer has Lucy in his sights as well. So as the story progresses, they find more bodies that are meant for Lucy to find. And at the same time, of course, they have to fall in love, which they do.
Well, with a book starring a medical examiner, I assume you do a lot of scientific research. I know you're a former science teacher. Does that background help you at all, or how do you learn what you need to know to write the books?
I have visited her morgue, and so I had the experience of actually being there and the feel and what it looks like. So I had that. I have friends that are doctors, and we've talked about the various aspects. So I did my research in that way. It was more anecdotal than anything else, and just Lucy as a character just became more real to me even than her profession.
So what drew you to writing romantic suspense? Are you a lifelong romance reader?
Actually, no. I didn't start reading romance until I was in my 20s, and it was because I was afraid to fly. And I would get on airplanes and I'd freak out, and I eventually started reading on the mean advice of the guy sitting next to me on the airplane who told me to go buy a book and be quiet.
Wow.
So I did. And I read lots of different kinds of books, and then I found a book by LaVarle Spencer, and I just knew that romance was the genre that I would love. I didn't actually start out writing romantic suspense. I read romance for years. I had read a little romantic suspense. My first romantic suspense was a book by Nora Roberts, Montana Sky, and I read it and I was like, wow, this has sisters, family, and it has a love story, and lots of love, and it has a serial killer. How cool is this? I wonder if she's written any more. And so I was delighted to find she'd written many more, and that kept me busy for years. I started writing my own books a little bit later than a couple years after that, and they were not they weren't suspenses. To start with, they were romances, but they weren't suspenses. And in fact, it was the advice of someone who read one of my books early on that says, you have a suspenseful voice. Have you ever considered trying romantic suspense? So I did.
And then you fell in love with that?
I did.
Because you've written, more than a dozen, is that right, romantic suspense?
You Belong to Me is my 12th.
Okay.
Yep.
And there's some interconnections between the books.
The characters form communities, and so the hero in one book may be the brother of a hero in another book. They may be best friends. They may be co-workers. They jump cities, usually through family ties. And my first big community was set in Chicago. And You Can't Hide, heroine Tess Ciccatelli has a brother who comes to visit her from Philadelphia named Vito. In book 7, that's Vito's book set in Philadelphia. And in that book, the villain actually has 2 siblings. Their stories are set in Atlanta. That's Scream for Me and Kill for Me.
So how do you decide? Is it like someone shows up in a book and kind of steals a scene, and then you're like, oh, well, They need a story of their
pretty
own.
much, pretty much. There was one character who just showed up. She was the Mia Mitchell, who is in my heroine of my 6th book, Count to 10. She shows up in I'm Watching You, the 3rd book, as the hero's partner, and I just fell in love with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I don't know if the readers will know who I'm talking about. Many of the younger ones might not, but when I was a girl, I read Trixie Belden mysteries, and for me, Mia was always a grown-up Trixie Belden, and with a harsher vocabulary. So anyway, so I knew she was going to have her own book. And there's been several characters that I knew right away would have their own book. They just had to wait for it a little bit.
Well, since we're at RWA, I have to ask if you have a favorite love story.
I think my favorite love story it's probably one of the LaVarle Spencer books. Maybe the first one I read, which was called Years. And it was about a young girl, a young woman who falls in love with an older man, and they make their lives work. So I think that was a beautiful story.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for talking to us today, and
Thank you.
good luck at the RITAs. We'll have our fingers crossed.
Thank you very much.